welcome to another episode of Happening Now with me, Tim. We start this week's news with something fun? How weird. It was recently announced that NASA is going to fly a helicopter on Mars. Its name is Ingenuity, which I can only assume is short for Ingenuity. I'm sticking by it. I'm just keeping it in. Anyways, after being removed from the bottom of the Perseverance rover, it was able to survive its first freezing cold night alone on Mars, where temperatures can reach as low as minus 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And NASA is hopeful to get it flying as early as April 11th. If they can get that flight to happen, it will be the first ever power-controlled flight on another planet that we know of. On to our next story. There was a shocking new poll published by Reuters that showed, quote, about half of Republicans believe that the siege, the January 6th insurrection, was a largely non-violent protest, or it was the handiwork of left-wing activists trying to make Trump look bad, which forced researchers to re-examine if human genetics were actually closer to that of the common banana than previously thought. One researcher's like, you know, there's a small part of the population that's actually 75% similar instead of just 50. I do love that they're like, guys, this wasn't a big deal and you're all overreacting. But also, like, we saw the video and it does kind of look bad. So actually, it was Democrats. But Democrats are weak and stupid. There's no way they'd be able to pull that off. Aw, jeez. Moving on, there was big news last week about Major League Baseball's decision to pull its All-Star game from Georgia following the state's new discriminatory voting law that passed last week. Now, a lot has been said about this new law, but just so you know, basically the point of the legislation was to target areas of color and make it harder for them to vote. The reason they passed this is because of the voting turnout in the November elections. For the first time in decades, the state not only voted for a Democratic president, but also 2 Democratic senators, which happened as a result of the highest black voter turnout in the state's history. It's shocking what happens when you let everyone vote. This move by the MLB caused an uproar in the conservative community, with most calling on everybody to boycott the MLB. One of the biggest critics of this move was actually friend of the show and captain of the permanently sad face group, Mitch McConnell, who was quoted saying, "My warning to corporate America is to stay out of politics." Which is shocking to hear from a man who wouldn't have any money or a job, in fact, if corporate America had stayed out of politics. What are you talking about, Mitch? The whole ideology of the Republican Party is corporations first, America second. And sometimes it feels like we're not even second on their list. Look, whether you like it or not, it is a private company, and if they want to move their game to Narnia, they're allowed to. It is bizarre, however, that they move for moral reasons, because I didn't think any large corporations cared about people. But they did, and that's something that's great, and it should be applauded, even if it is technically the slowest game in the whole world. But, fun fact, Mitch, right after laying down the hammer on corporations, did stop to clarify that they're still free to give him money. What an asshole. Now, for a Tim Time break. Finally, for our last story, tax laws, specifically corporate tax rates in the US. There has been a lot of talk recently about moving corporate tax percentages. But before we get into all that, I wanted to give everybody a quick history lesson on taxation of corporations here in the US. So, for the first 200 years of this country, there was a pretty standard corporate tax rate that hovered around 50%. However, in the mid-80s, we started to see those tax rate percentages fall from just south of 50% to about 35%, due in part to President Ronald Reagan's push for large tax cuts for the wealthy. The term coined for this ideology was trickle-down economics. Basically, what people in power believed at that time was that eventually the rich in this country would get so much money that they couldn't contain all of it, and the extra money would just fall down to the middle class. They were wrong. What the wealthy found in this country was that there's no such thing as too much for them. So that money never fell, and the middle to upper class separation grew for decades. Then, in 2017, Republicans pushed by then-President Trump lowered the corporate tax rate from the low 30s to 21%, saying that corporations would compete to be here in the US and that the US job market would explode and the middle class would be lifted up. They were wrong. Again. Now, in 2021, there's talk about lifting that corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, still noticeably lower than where it was in 2017. And we're doing that so that we can, as a country, take the extra money and put it into public programs. These are the same programs I discussed in last week's episode when I talked about the infrastructure plan. Just as a reminder, that increase would help fund things like manufacturing, research and development, climate and transportation infrastructure, as well as childcare, paid family leave, healthcare, and education. So, now that you know a little bit about the history, what we're going to talk about next week is how likely that 21% is to raise to 28%. Annoyingly unlikely, at least in its current form. Every hurdle this will have to pass to make this happen, and what that means for corporations and society moving forward if that change happens. And that's our show for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this week's slightly lighter topics, and I cannot wait to see you all next week. Adios!